Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So as with the Tempest reveal, where we were expecting a blog post from ArenaNet giving us details on Thursday, but there was a third-party website that gave us information on the Wednesday instead, the same has happened here for the Herald. Yes, this is the Glint themed elite specialization for the Revenant. The plan was to talk about this anyway today, but they've given us all the information too. So this is one that's got some fairly strong ties back to the original character Glint in the first game. Now, earlier in the week we talked about her lore, and I specifically didn't talk very much about what she did mechanically. I briefly touched on the idea that the Glint elite specialization could have something of a control focus, and we'll see by the end of this video whether the Herald really has that or not, and I'll kind of explain my thinking why. So let's get through the original Glint stuff first and see where they've been inspired. So first of all, we really only interacted with Glint through one mission. She was present in the plot in many places, but we only got to see her fighting and really experience a lot of her combat style in one mission. And even at that, it was a special bonus objective where you try and steal one of her eggs, and she gets very, very angry with you, and then you end up defeating her over it. In fact, Marjorie and Casimir reference this when you go to the Dragon's Lair again in Guild Wars 2. So there are two special things that I think we can really look at here. First are the trials to reach Glint, and second is Glint herself. So let's start with the trials. The story set up that Glint was this powerful creature that many people would seek an audience with because she had this prophetic nature about her. They would consult her, but she would only consult with those who were truly worthy. People, for example, like the Ascended. And there were a variety of trials to get through. You had to pass through many of her forgotten defenders who were like testing people as they came in. In Guild Wars 1, you'd kill a lot of named forgotten bosses, and then later on they'd appear in other trials and other places. Anyway, in the Dragon's Lair, you'd fight a lot of forgotten, but you'd go through 6 specific different regions. This is what you've been seeing in the footage. These were facets, and it seems very much, now that we know there are 6 Elder Dragons and some later quests in Eye of the North, they're referencing the 6 Elder Dragons here. These facets were translucent dragons, as you can see, and while their abilities were just kind of copies and interesting builds based off of the original 6 Guild Wars 1 professions, each area had some kind of an environmental effect. And these were all really debuffy control-based effects. So in the Warrior facet area, the Balthazar area, the Primordus area, if you will, if you want to link it, if you're a believer in those theories, it had big knockdowns. Knockdowns would globally hit you every 20 seconds or so, and you'd be on the floor for like 5 seconds. It was really, really frustrating room to get through. If you, original balance of the game, if that thing struck while you were in a tense fight, that could be you wiping. The Nature Room with Melandru and potentially Mordremoth linked, had a global slow debuff on you. The one for the Necromancer, I believe, had an energy degeneration. The Elementalist one had a variety of wards and AoEs in the area, so you'd have to pass through these dangerous locations. The only area that never had its own special effect was the Lissa facet. And that's fairly interesting, because Lissa has always been sort of associated with chaos magic, and we have from the living world this idea that chaos magic is really just a misnomer, and that what we're talking about is dragon magic, so that would be like it in general. I don't know, there's some weird lore stuff going on there, and it may sound like I'm ranting, but this will become relevant in a second when we start to talk about the Herald. Anyway, so those were the 6 environmental debuffs, and then we have the Glint fight herself too. As I say, optional, but a very well-structured battle that you had to bring very specific things and interrupt, namely, and the right types of damage. So let's just go through her, kind of like we did with Ishiro, and talk about what ability she popped and when. So first, let's talk about her most dangerous skill, Jagged Crystal Skin. Now what this does is, if you are nearby to her, basically people who are in melee, people are kind of close, whenever she took physical damage, so in that game this was stuff that, you know, most martial weapons were applying this, unless specifically they weren't, blunt damage, piercing damage, slashing damage, all that stuff. If she ever took physical damage, anyone near her would take huge damage in return. And in fact, that's what you can see right now, me getting spiked down in this video as I deliberately tried to melee her through it. So that was Jagged Crystal Skin, an incredibly offensive attack. Then the rest of her abilities were fairly controlly and debuffy. She had something called Crystal Haze. Now, she would only cast this when she was above 90% health. So it was kind of like Glint's Scholar thing. As soon as you started doing damage to her, she wouldn't cast this anymore. But this was a nasty hex. If you were balled together, it would hit everyone in an AoE, and it would cut massively away your energy. And then every time you use a skill, you would like get exhausted or overcast, as the mechanic became in the end, which would completely lock you out of being able to use abilities unless you found a way to cleanse it. Really, really potent effect that could just annihilate teams. But once you got her down a little bit of health, she would start using different abilities. She wouldn't use Crystal Haze anymore. Below 50% health, she would use something called Crystal Hibernation. This was her heal skill. Now, this thing had a huge cast time, like an immense cast time. But if she managed to finish it, she would get huge regeneration, and then whenever she took non-physical damage, so this is elemental damage and various magical damage like that, she would get massive chunk heals. So you can see the synergy there and the balance between this and Jagged Crystal Skin. Jagged Crystal Skin, whenever she takes physical damage, she's hurting everyone around her, but then when she uses Crystal Hibernation, whenever she takes elemental damage, which is probably what you're using to not die to Jagged Crystal Skin, she's instead healing up massively. So basically the strategies people would use is they'd use tons of elemental damage, and then they'd interrupt the heal. They'd interrupt Crystal Hibernation, and then it didn't matter. Jagged Crystal Skin wouldn't do anything, and neither would Crystal Hibernation. So you'd bring like a D-shot ranger. These were the fun times, guys. So then lastly, before we move on to the Herald itself, she had Crystal Bonds. She would only use this when she got very low on health, but what this would do is strip an enchantment, more debuffy, control-y style stuff, and she would hex them with Crystal Bonds, which would slow down your movement speed like in a huge way. And the way a lot of players would get around this, particularly I mained Mesmer in Guild Wars 1, and we had an ability called Inspired Hex. And what this would be was the Mesmer would remove a hex from someone, and then they'd be able to cast it themselves. But because Glint's abilities were so overpowered, you couldn't cast her own abilities, so it would just have an instant cooldown, and you just keep casting Inspired Hex all over the place, sucking the hex off of everyone and saving the team. It was pretty awesome. So there you go. That's the Glint fight. That's what we knew about her lore-wise and mechanic-wise. Let's have a look at the Herald in Guild Wars 2. First, to talk about the name, because I know a lot of us feel that the name is very important. It's an okay name. I don't see it having too much relevance. This probably was a good opportunity for them to do one of those Tyrion-based lore names, which seem to be in fairly short supply in my opinion. But it's functional, it's in that sweet spot where no one's really got anything to complain about, but nothing to be super excited about either, name-wise. Let's talk about the juicy stuff. So, Legendary Dragon Stance is the name. Oh, doesn't that sound fantastic? And this is described as a frontline, and listen to this, a frontline support and utility legend. Alright, we even have the quote that this will bolster allies in tough situations, encouraging you to remain close to reap benefits of this stance. So it's exactly the same niche as the Tempest, right? Right? Well, in the interview at the end of the article, Roy does talk a little bit about this. He does say it as well. This guy is supporting allies not just in close range. You could perhaps run it for the backline as well. Hammer may still be lacking in a few places, but the idea would be you could run a hammer, go huge range, and buff like your ranged DPSs. It's interesting to me that even suggests, oh, your ranged DPSs, since we don't really have that clear distinction in many places in Guild Wars 2 right now. But yeah, this is basically a bunda, guys. Upkeeps have, of course, been a part of the Revenant. Well, this Legendary Dragon Stance is entirely built around upkeeps. Everything is an upkeep. So that's going to be fairly interesting. Aside from, of course, the weapon skills it gets available. Yes, it's shield. Come on, we all knew it was going to be shield at this point. But the key thing here is, what exactly does the shield do? Well, first we hear about this skill, Envoy of Exuberance. God, these have got some fancy names. Protect and heal allies with energy that cascades out and comes back. This is ground targeted. So when I first heard about this, I thought it would come out from around you as the Revenant. Obviously, when we see the stream and we see it in action, it'll become a lot easier to visualize. But you're going to plop this down somewhere and think about, again, with the Tempest, the fire shout, okay? It's got these waves that come out, you know, this new cascade effect. What they're saying is it will cascade out and then it will cascade back in. And what does it do? It applies protection and it heals people as it does it. So I wonder, as an ally, depends how quick this thing moves, can a Herald use this ability and then you are in desperate need of health and you like follow the cascade out and follow it back in so each wave hits you? That would be pretty cool. Then we got the skill 5. Crystal Hibernation. So yes, one of Glint's skills does reappear. Of everything I described earlier, really, the heal was the thing most pugs paid most attention to. Like, if you could interrupt that, your random Ellies and bit of elemental damage and people could just range her down. So Crystal Hibernation they brought back. This is essentially, I mean, look at this image. This is Fortify from Elementalist Earth Shield. You crouch down, you shield yourself with this massive thing that protects you from incoming damage. Now, unlike Fortify, it doesn't make you invulnerable. So, as you are not invulnerable, you're just reducing damage that takes and people can still CC you. Things are a little bit different. What this does is prevents damage, it heals you, and I'm guessing prevents damage by a threshold or prevents damage like Endure Pain does, but conditions can still tick on you. And CCs can still come in, so it gives you a Defiance bar. So this sounds pretty exciting, you know, it sounds really strong. Oh, we got this meaty Defiance bar. I can't help but compare it to what would just seem to be superior in Fortify. Fortify lasts for a long time, and it doesn't need a Defiance bar because it's an invulnerability, and that just protects you from CCs at the same time too. But then this isn't tied to a utility skill, so maybe it's not directly comparable, but it's an interesting thought. It gets a little bit more interesting then when the article treated this as this incredibly powerful thing, and they asked, hey, what are the downsides to it? And Roy explains that if the break bar is shattered, obviously, whenever they put a break bar in the game, they can have the shatter effect be something unique. And so for this break bar, if they get through it, it stuns you for 2 seconds, and during those 2 seconds, you have 25 vulnerability on you. So you are in dire straits, and people can take massive advantage of being able to break through that. I really like the gameplay that they're encouraging there. It just seems weird, though, that then you've got, you know, hard invulns that struggle for just as much damage, don't even have to worry about the CC, and don't have the downside at the same time. But we'll see how it's balanced. I do think numbers can make this a really cool skill. That's it, really. You know, like the Chronomancer, we don't have too much to talk about on the weapon side of things. That's okay, though. Most of the Revenant is new and shiny anyway. So let's have a look at what happens with the right-hand side of our skill bar. Now, we knew for a while from data mining that there would be signets, or what appeared to be signet icons. These skills aren't described to us as signets, but they functionally are kind of similar. And by that I mean a signet kind of has a passive and it has an active. And these skills also sort of have passives, they're upkeep, so when you toggle them on, they're doing something passively. And then they have something you can kind of burst out with them as well. So this signet art we saw before kind of is applicable, but they're not exactly signets. So I wonder whether we're really going to see signet art on it in the end. You know, maybe an earlier iteration, a very recent iteration of the Herald had these described as signets, but then they changed. So what the devs did was they looked at the fact they had 5 skills to fill and a unique profession mechanic to include with the Herald. And then they looked back at the Dragon's Lair mission I was talking to you guys about at the start of this video and thought, hey, we have 6 facets. So what they did was combine the 6 facets onto the 6 abilities the Revenant will get. And yes, I just said 6. There's going to be a heal skill, that's 1, 3 utilities, that's 4, an elite, that's 5, and then there's going to be a special 6th one as well for the profession mechanic, which I'll talk about in a second. And these are all tied to the facets. So here are the examples we got. Remember, this guy is very supportive, so each of its passives is kind of like a really well-designed Guardian virtue. I remember what they originally said about Guardians and their virtues, and how they were saying, you know, you'll be passively giving this stuff out, but then you can choose to release it for the benefit for yourself, and, you know, get a little bit of damage, get a bit of a heal, or something like that. And that's exactly what the Revenant is doing here. Or on paper, it seems to be a bit more fun than the way the virtues ended up. But here we go. So the first upkeep is for the facet of elements. This was the Elementalist boss we fought before. Now, this grants swiftness just permanently to allies around you while you're upkeeping it. And I'm guessing that the balance of this will be such that it's really easy to just keep that there. So while the Herald's around you, hey, check it out, you just got a lot of swiftness rolling. That's pretty nice. And then the activation on it is said to blast out a few negative condies, which doesn't sound too good, but the examples they say are weakness and burning, which are both very, very strong conditions. And specifically for people trying to play Condi Revenants, this will be nice to hear. I'm actually less surprised as time goes on that they're revealing the Herald now, because I feel like the Herald, with its, you know, extra little bits of support here and there, its extra little bit of tankiness here and there, its extra bit of conditions here and there, are really what the other specs that are currently really lackluster with the Revenant are relying on. You know, they're taking a lot of feedback about the Revenant right now, and I think they just want to get the whole thing in our hands. And yeah, this could mean next beta we get the Herald too, just FYI. Next they talk to us about the Elite, just jump straight into it. And this is the facet of Chaos. So that tangent I went on earlier about how Chaos is kind of different and it might be dragon magic, well, it gets the place of the Elite. I always love to see Lissa fan service, my god. So it's the facet of Chaos and Chaotic Release. This has got a much higher upkeep cost to keep this going, but instead of swiftness, a fairly minor boon, a lot of people will be able to provide that for themselves or blast a bit, and there you go. This will give you protection passively. That is very strong. And the active there don't describe very well. They say, use Glint's wings to control enemies while granting buffs to friends. What buffs? How are we controlling enemies? They say that the animation we saw on the trailer is this ability. That really doesn't tell us anything mechanically. I'm guessing it's probably like a big ground-targeted AoE blowout. You know, the old Guardian Tomes ground target, like, cone-shaped things? I wouldn't be surprised if it's like that. You know, Glint appears behind you, she starts flapping her wings, and she's doing, like, massive blowouts far away. That would not surprise me. So that's what we got on the right-hand side of the skill bar. Still a lot of mystery there. And so lastly, they talk about the profession mechanic, the facet of nature. Now, I might get this slightly wrong, but bear with me here, with the way that it's worded. It sounds like they're giving us an F3, okay? So the facet of nature is the unique profession mechanic, and this is something you're going to get in addition to your other legends. They say specifically that this can be used no matter which stance you're currently using. So if I'm in Shiro stance, I have my weapon skills, I have the Shiro skills on the right-hand side of my skill bar, and now I have another skill that I can use whenever I like. This is the facet of nature, and I'm assuming this is an F3 slot. So pressing F3 doesn't then make me glint specialized. It doesn't attune me to glint as a legend. It just gives me another ability. Now, I guess that they kind of picked nature for the profession mechanic because, you know, we're fighting Morgemorth. Morgemorth is kind of the nature facet as well, if you follow those lines. So they're making this one the special one. But so this is an upkeep skill you get access to regardless of what else you're doing. You could be trying to tank your ass off as Jarlis, wielding a shield, and you will have this upkeep available should you wish to toggle it on. And this one's really strong, okay? This increases outgoing boon duration by 50%. So that's a huge number, But what is even more important about this is it doesn't just mean the boons you pulse out to people are 50% bigger, but this is an AoE that is applying to everyone else around you. So if you're a Chronomancer stood next to the Herald, and the Herald toggles into the nature stance, and then you as the Chronomancer drop a time warp, your quickness from that time warp will also be 50% longer. So everyone's getting that benefit. Very, very powerful, and you can kind of see that positional play come in there. And then, of course, it has an activate as well. The activate, from what little they told us, sounds incredible. And this kind of coalesces all of the facets together and activates their activate ability all at once. Damn, so that sounds pretty exciting too, but they really don't elaborate very much on there. They just say activate all the other facet boons in one burst. Alright, okay, so we'll see how that goes. Lots of boon sharing going out, lots of support. Definitely much less of a control angle than I was thinking it would, based just off of purely the glint fight. But seems to do some things very well. I think it's very easy as a Guardian player to compare Revenant now to your Guardian stuff. In fact, a lot of classes have been doing that. Necromancers have been comparing themselves. Thieves have been comparing themselves to the Revenant. And now Guardians definitely will be with this as well. And that is the way that the Herald works. One other tiny little bit of news that I don't really want to linger on since the video is quite long, but they did talk about underwater stuff for the Revenant. Nothing too crazy out of the ordinary here. What you have to remember is Revenant, because they use energy, no cooldowns, it does change things a little. They have this idea where you're going to use an underwater ability, and at first it'll be putting out condies, and then you can spike it again if you like, in the same way that you're cancelling these upkeeps and getting big explosions of effects. You can do that with your underwater abilities too. This isn't just Herald, this is Revenant in general, and then you would get flat physical damage. So if you're a Condi Revenant, you kind of don't activate that bit. If you're a physical damage Revenant, then you do activate that. That's the way they want the underwater stuff to work. In a nutshell, that's really it. Even though Revenant now has weapon swap, they only announced one underwater weapon, that's the spear. So we could have a class here who can weapon swap underwater, but only go one spear into another spear. Why would you want to do that? Sigil of Intelligence, other on-swap effects, but really very little other reason. And just like Revenants wielding their ranged hammers and their melee staves, of course, they're getting a spear, which is a ranged weapon for underwater. Unfortunately, yes, and really, we could have seen this coming. That does mean Archimorus, or any other underwater legend you really like the sound of, is not actually going to be a thing. It sounds like they're just going to port the other legends we've heard of to function underwater and jig the ground targeted skills. There wasn't really much of a comment. So there you go, guys. That is the news about the Revenant, about the Herald. Let me know what you think about this elite specialization. As I said, I'm pretty confident it will be there in the next beta. I want to hear specifically, okay, about you Guardians, the Guardians out there, what do you think? Do you think that this is time for a reroll? I love the thought that there's all these distinct different players from different previous classes just going Revenant now because they think that they prefer how the Revenant taps into that playstyle than their original class did. Anyway, cheers guys, thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow.